Right, the Water Quality Management Committee meeting Thursday, January 18th, 2017 will come to order. Before we get into the agenda, I'd let it be known we're joined by our usual contingent from the League of Women Voters, the Falmouth Enterprise, the Board of Selectmen, and the Planning Board. Thank you all for being here. First item, to discuss draft scenario for achieving TMDL compliance in Green Pond watershed. This is something we've been doing watershed by watershed for the last few months, looking at them, seeing what the TMDL is, seeing how best to achieve it using the means that we know are available, and it's Green Pond's turn.
Do we want to turn off a light?
There are two lights that have little marks on them that are.
You know, there are three, but we can experiment.
So that one and the one above. The one above, yeah. Sort of worked this out with FCTV so that they have enough light for an interesting meeting, and we have enough less light, darkness to actually see the slots.
Okay.
So here we are at Green Pond. We usually start out by just taking a quick aerial view. We've seen this pretty recently, but just to recap. We know that Mill Pond was man-made prior to 1880, and we see that at Route 28. So the estuary, Green Pond estuary, goes up to Route 28, and then right on the other side of the highway, where the East Falmouth Library is, there's Mill Pond, and it provides significant attenuation. All of the groundwater that's coming in from the northern part of the estuary is kind of goes into the pond, and there's a nitrogen removal factor from the pond. And because of the level of impairment, we've heard from the residents and the East Falmouth Village Association, and had a meeting at the library. SMAS was engaged to study that. Oh, thank you. Study that. What was happening now in Mill Pond with the significant growth of vegetation. And that report is due. They did the research last summer, but then it takes them a bit of time to compile the data, and that report is actually due June 30th, 2018. So we're very excited to see what might be done to clean up Mill Pond and thereby improve and increase and at least maintain the significant attenuation of nitrogen that water body produces for us. So that's that. We looked at the monitoring station. Green Pond has quite a few stations. As you can see, there's a station south of the bridge, and then a number of stations going up, sort of below Falmouth Port is the last, that's not Falmouth Port, I would say the school. If you look on the right-hand side where G2 is, that area is near where the East Falmouth Elementary School is. And then there's one that goes all the way up at the bridge. It may look like it's in Mill Pond, but it's not. It's on the other side at the bridge. So we start at the bridge, and there's 6 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we get a pretty good picture of what is happening in terms of the water quality parameters in Green Pond. Our nitrogen concentration, and I'm going to get the pointer to show us something. This work, which it sometimes does. Yeah. There we go. So the Sentinel station is right here, G4. We saw that just now. It's hard to tell from this actual rendering because of the light and the colors, but the switch over from water quality that is acceptable, which in this particular case is 0.45 milligrams of nitrogen per liter, to to impaired, which is this 4, this sort of 5, is right at this line. It doesn't show up as well, as I said, with the colors here, but if you look at it in the actual MEP report, the impairment starts here. So that's important for thinking about any infrastructure changes that we might want to be considering, where it is impaired. But there's quite a bit of flushing within here that happens. This water affects what happens upstream and downstream, obviously not all the way up there. But I think that was sort of an important note on our nitrogen concentration. And we have a pretty good gradient because of all those monitoring stations, right? And so the other thing we like to look at is density of development. And I think this map and the one we're going to see in a little bit shows a lot of residential development in the southern part, which is this side here, south of Route 28, this is Route 28. This is the southern part of the estuary. This is the estuary itself here. And then this is 28, and this is north. And so this, because it's such a long, sort of a pencil of a watershed, the northern part of the watershed doesn't have nearly the density of development that the southern section has. And then from our numbers, seeing what our present loads are and what the threshold load would be by the modeling, we see that we need to remove about 4,500 kilograms of nitrogen a year. The sources are, as usual, septic systems at 85%, and stormwater and fertilizer at 7 and 8% respectively. And so we go into, we are going to go into looking at how we can address those particular sources.
But while you're right here, you might address from WWTF.
So this 3% of the overall load says that it's from the wastewater treatment facility. And that is something that we have questioned in pretty much every MEP report that it's come up. And I think we have the same, if you'd like to add something.
Well, I think in this case, it might be because of the Ashumet Valley plume, which
Has been
comes
remediated.
from a wastewater treatment facility.
So you think it's from that?
I think it's from Otis,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
right.
can see any way it could be from us.
And
Yeah, I
although the volatile organics have been addressed, the nitrate and to some degree ammonia that's in that plume.
So you're thinking it's from the plume
That-
from this
That's right.
Ashumet- the
Yep.
Ashumet-
Yeah.
And a portion of that plume does, from the modeling, exit into Bacchus River, which is the northern end of Green Pond.
Right, but for our purposes, it's not a controllable load.
It's
Well,
not
also-
controllable.
It's also a very small
And
percentage.
it's a tiny,
It's a
Even
small-
if you removed 100% of 3%,
Would get us
what do you
nowhere.
do?
which
Yeah.
is why we sort
Yeah.
of gloss it, don't think about it, and really try to get at the big rocks. And if it's
Right.
half of stormwater, we're not,
But
we're not
I
gonna
think
focus
that's
on
the
it.
reason in this case.
That's the issue, it's the issue we're putting.
Makes sense.
So those are the sources, and the other, I thought, interesting point that we wanted to look at is, in some cases, like with the Coonamessett River, there's a significant fraction of nitrate as part of the, what's going in. So if you look at the Coonamessett River, it's a huge volume. And in terms of the Bacchus River, it's not such a large volume. But also, if you look at the amount of nitrate, it's a pretty big percent, and it's a pretty big number, and then it's 66% nitrate in the total nitrogen. But where the Bacchus Brook is concerned, it's a small volume. It's also a very small fraction of nitrate, so it's not particularly treatable. Nitrate is ready to be dealt with in the sense of denitrification. It's been nitrified, so, but if it's not even nitrified, it's probably not going to be particularly addressable. So the stream is not a source to go after either. And so with that, we've got a goal of 4,453, so 4,453 kilograms of nitrogen to remove. And if we take our systematic approach of looking at fertilizer and stormwater and taking 25% of the total, we get about 400 kilograms from that approach. And then if we take the Falmouth aquaculture plan and look at what the town is doing in terms of municipal propagation, because Green Pond was not identified as an aquaculture estuary. It's a very busy boat basin. There's a ton of moorings, boat traffic, docks, piers, and the committee, the working group, thought this was not a place for aquaculture. But there's a very robust municipal propagation program where oysters are taken out of Little Pond and propagated here, and quahogs seem to do well. So the shellfish numbers are for municipal propagation, 1 million oysters, 1 million quahogs, and some denitrification, which seemed like a practical number to at least be starting with shellfish. And then there is the East Falmouth Elementary School septic system that we've looked at, and we put a well there with USGS and GS and have looked at that and did a calculation on what the potential contribution from that leach field actually is going into Green Pond, and it's about 35 kilograms. So if you add up those source or those potential removal items, you still have a pretty big load to remove. You still have, I mean, you get from 44 to 35 or 36. So the non-traditional approaches are going to take, 1,000 kilograms or so. But we still are going to have to look at some structural measures. So the two combined approaches that are presented here for the committee, obviously, to discuss and think about are if we were to sewer the Acapesket Peninsula, which is what we talked about for Great Pond, that it's mostly a Great Pond sewer project, but a fraction of the Great Pond, or a fraction of the Acapesket Peninsula happens to be in the Green Pond watershed, about 535 houses. If you only go as far down as Oak Grove, which is a little bit north of the bridge.
Can you put up a map while you're talking about this part?
I can, but I won't.
I mean, I don't want to destroy the flow of your talk.
Let me go
but
back, I'm almost done,
end.
and then we can
Okay.
go to the map, because
Okay.
you're absolutely right, we want to see the map. So the idea would be the Acapesket Peninsula, and here I'll just do this. Here's the Acapesket Peninsula, for those who don't remember, is this side, I'm looking for
On the
there.
left.
Well, I was looking for my pointer. So this is the Acapesket Peninsula, and this is what we'd call the Davisville Peninsula. And so the idea would be if we were going to sewer for Great Pond, which is over on this side, you'd sewer the whole peninsula, and you would get all of this, which is in Green Pond. And that calculation, if you only go as far as, and the bridge isn't on here, so the bridge is right here. If you only go to about here, so taking, respecting the fact that if you sewer down here, you're not necessarily going to be removing nitrogen that's going to affect the quality of water up at the head. What you see is that you get a fair bit of nitrogen out. You get about 2,600 kilograms from those 535 homes. But you're still short a little bit less than 1,000 kilograms. So the idea would be putting in innovative alternative septic systems on the Davisville side at 195 properties that would be determined by an open and fair and and politically correct process, right, Steve? And you would then achieve your nitrogen removal goals. So it's a combination approach. The non-traditional, the shellfish and the fertilizer and the stormwater are actually a big help, because then you're able to just put sewer where sewers were going to go for Great Pond anyway, and solve the rest of the problem with innovative alternative septic systems. And just briefly, I wanted to show this again. The reason for that we've talked about this before. This Acapesket Peninsula is very small lots. The average size is 1/3 of an acre, where on the Davisville side, the average lot size is 1/2 an acre. So that's a pretty big difference. Each property here contributes about 5 kilograms of nitrogen per year. There are just 1,000 properties south of 28, and the lower watershed is pretty much at build-out, which is important from not increasing development if you're going to add infrastructure. Then I want to show this is we had talked about this before. The stormwater at Captain's Lane it's a big catchment area. It's it's putting a lot of nitrogen into the system. We looked at it as part of the EPA grant that we applied for, and found some rational that we could actually do something here at Captain's Lane. This is the East Falmouth School, where we talked about putting some remediation, maybe a small PRB to remove that 35 kilograms. But I want to show you the pictures of the storm drains at Captain's Lane. This would be the area. This is the end of the right-of-way, so this is town-owned, where you could probably put in some sort of a remediation and get that 120 kilograms. So it's a feasible, there's a real stormwater project that could be implemented as part of the Green Pond remediation. And these are the areas where the town currently propagates oysters, and could also include cohogs in that, or do more oysters, either or. So I'm not saying they have to do cohogs.
Is this where the shellfish are that you were counting as removing nitrogen?
Yes, they are. The town is currently putting them there now.
You see where I'm going? The same mistake we made on Quistit the first time.
No, they never started putting, this is started with the Little Pond project. So the MEP report was done years before, and the nitrogen numbers are from years before. And these are very recent proof of concept.
Right, but I mean, you had a chart earlier where you said of numbers.
Yeah, it's the color,
Yes.
the color chart.
These,
Okay, the 280 and the 140.
those are the oysters we're putting in now.
Now you
In
go back.
those-
Now you go back to your aerial view.
Yeah,
There.
Those are the. We're
Yes.
talking the same thing, right?
yes,
Except that's in the dark blue, where there's no
Point, yep.
nitrogen problem.
but it's still removing it from the whole estuary.
But what counts is the concentration at the Sentinel station.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting we would have to put the shellfish?
I mean, to make a
I-
ridiculous example, you could do it out in Vineyard Sound, and you know it wouldn't do anything.
Right.
And it's still
Right,
close.
it is absolutely in the lower, except for I would say these guys, so this is one area, if we wanted to, if, you know, you make a very, very valid point. This area, you might want to consider as being part of the remediation because the Sentinel station is right about there. So it's very close to the Sentinel station. But you're suggesting that for any of these shellfish to count, they would have to be up in the upper watershed.
It would be better.
It would be better, and I think right now the thing that we've done, because it's good habitat, and it's good access for people to go get, and it was considered the relay site for a demonstration project in Little
Oh, yeah,
Pond.
oysters are great.
They're
They
here.
even taste good.
So-
And they make money and all sorts of things. But if you want credit toward the nitrogen, it matters where they are.
Maybe,
Well, we'll get the credit for the nitrogen, but you're right, they do us a lot more good further up.
Yeah.
right. We might get the credit for the nitrogen if they're right there. It's just a question of whether that credit is translated into actual water quality,
Which is the bottom line.
which is the bottom line.
In the town propagation plan, why did they think growing shellfish north of the bridge wasn't a good idea, or wasn't particularly a good idea?
So the bottom is muck.
Okay,
There's a lot of boat traffic.
even up there?
Oh, and docks. Yeah, it's a very busy area up there.
And so they're trying to clean them up. So they want to be able to deal with it.
Fair enough.
Good point.
Yeah.
Right, but, right.
They don't grow in mud.
This is for, yeah, this, well, they don't grow on muck, and I think the point would be it would have to be more of a gear-based
Yeah, well,
filter. And you could do it, I mean, the town could do it as part of, I mean, as we're implementing a full solution, we'd probably start with the infrastructure. We'd start with, you know, the sewer on the Acapesket side and the IAs on the Davisville side, and then if we needed that extra 400 kilograms, we'd work on the shellfish. We wouldn't start with the shellfish because relative to the load, I mean, you need, if you need 4,500 kilograms, 400 is like 10%. So
Right, yeah.
it's
No,
not
I
going
just
to
mentioned it
see
because
anything.
these yellow
Yeah,
things jumped out at me.
that's good,
But
that's good. All right, so
it's not the
we're
big
discussing.
problem.
So I'm going to sit back to take notes on our discussion and try to capture some of these initial thoughts.
Steve?
If, I guess you don't have it, but I'd love to see a map of where, I don't remember the numbers now, was it 500 some sewer properties and 195 some IA properties or something like that?
Yep.
Where they would be. I mean, see it as a fraction of the houses graphically in a map form.
Right, so I can show you,
The Seward area, you can just go back.
right, so the Seward area would be from, to get the 535, I can't remember the exact number, it is basically from here all the way up to 28. That is
All the houses in,
All of
in
them.
this watershed.
all of them, yes.
Okay.
For
But
the,
Yeah, that 500 though is just on the west side,
in
That's
the
right.
the,
Acapesket
in the
side.
Because the sewer
green,
pipe's there.
Right.
in the
Will be.
Green Pond watershed, from this line, which is the watershed line, to Green Pond, if you think of this as a polygon from 28 on this side of the line, so it's in the Green Pond watershed, to about the bridge, 535 homes. I'm not counting the Great Pond watershed homes in that.
Right.
And that is what, and the way we did the math was to say how many homes are there in that entire area. And what does that get you if you sewer them?
And then use IH for the balance.
Right, for people who aren't familiar with the color coding, the blue is the smallest lots. The red is the smallest lots, I'm sorry, the blue is the next smallest, and the yellow is the next smallest. But anything in color is under 15,000, and anything red is under 7,000. The red square in the northern section there is extremely small lots, but they're all in the St. Anthony's graveyard.
Right.
So they don't contribute a lot of nitrogen.
Yeah, we usually cover that up, sorry, I didn't get it, right. Yeah.
Oh, but they're legally lots, and that's why it comes out that way.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
That's funny.
Right. And I usually cover it up because we don't want to talk about the graveyard.
They probably tax them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, some of it's waterfront, you could get.
You thought you could get out of Texas like that.
And so Steve, just as the 195 that would be on the Davisville side,
Right.
just
If you squeeze them all into the top,
if you
let's say.
do them all into the top, you get, you're about here. You're
Or
here up.
alternatively, you could do waterfront back some distance, or
Yes.
mix
Yep.
and match, or
Yeah,
whatever.
there's lots, waterfront
Makes
back,
more sense.
but not down here, you know? You'd have to-
But, and then also, can you go back to the last one that showed the Sentinel station? Yeah,
That one?
no, that was the one.
Oh,
Notice that's the G4 there. I
Yeah.
can see it, I don't know if other people.
yes.
Yeah.
It is about as far north of the bridge as the bridge is from Vineyard Sound,
Yep,
right?
Yep.
okay.
Now go back to your oyster picture. It's not just above that. It's
You think
pretty
it's-
far up.
You think, well,
Yeah.
this is also an aerial, so it is not as, I've been to the station. The reason I say this is I've actually gone and done water samples at that station, and it is not that far from the bridge. It may,
There's a certain amount of
so-
parallax or something.
Well, but it's
Well,
also
but the parallax is the same. The whole thing.
the actual location on the map of this map.
Or, yeah, that's the other way of doing it, is showing on this
It's
one, where are the
not-
oysters?
Yes.
It's far, this G4 is actually, anyway,
Depends sometimes where the water tester lives.
pretty much.
They might move around.
It moves around a little bit, so I think we'd have
Might be
to, but
affected by
as I said, I
weather,
wasn't
too.
I'm not that concerned about the shellfish because it's not gonna be the solution. It's really gonna be a polishing step after the infrastructure because of the high removal.
Oh, I agree. I was just
That's all.
being a nitpicking scientist, because
good.
you said, oh, it's right there near the Sentinel station.
Right, and that
It
just
didn't
came
strike me
from
that,
just,
sure.
just ground experience, having been out there. It doesn't seem that far from the bridge.
One thing that's different about this estuary is that there's no red or, usually we see a lot
Yep.
more red and yellow colors, which means a lot higher concentration of nitrogen. But the highest this gets is sort of murky green.
And it's because of Mill Pond,
Yeah.
that the nitrate coming from the upper watershed gets intercepted before it gets to the head of this estuary. And when you look at the entire watershed and the MEP recommendations, and also in the CWMP, there is no sewering required. It's zero north of Route 28, and it's all because of Mill Pond. And that the problem is only in the lower watershed, south of Mill Pond. So it's very important that we know what's going on in Mill Pond and
Yeah.
that we preserve its health. So this estuary, you're actually looking at what's the impact of the houses on either side of it in the lower watershed without having an additional imported problem from the northern watershed,
From the river.
from the river.
Right.
The river is the conduit.
It's actually amazing that you have to remove as much as you do,
Yeah.
given that
Well-
the Sentinel station is so close to where you wouldn't have to remove anything.
I think it's unusual for them to put the Sentinel station so farther south. I don't know why they did that. Sometimes, Sentinel
Keep it
stations.
quiet, don't put it on TV.
We're glad they did.
Right.
Well, they had a reason.
but-
A lot of these things are going to have to be ground truth. I mean, the MEP
course.
report is at a certain level of analysis, and when we take it to the next level, we're going to have to understand more thoroughly.
You could suggest to them that they need or they go out and sample, right? There isn't
Uh-huh.
an
I'm going to stay on this for just 1 minute. it's a subsequent conversation because each watershed will need its own targeted plan that ultimately gets submitted to the state. But the choice of whether the IA systems, the 195, are start at the north end and come all the way down, or whether you start at the shoreline and move in 600 feet, 1,000 feet. But if you were to take that second idea, I want you to look at the density of those, that development that's sort of in the aqua area. And then just think about it both ways as from a policy point of view. If you come in 600 feet or 1,000 feet, you clearly will at some point have, he has an IA, but I live next door and I don't, because that's where the line was drawn.
Right.
Whereas if you go street by street coming down, if you're on the street, then, you know, we're all in the same boat and the next street south of us is not at this time. And so just ultimately that's a political and community decision, but you can see that it's not an easy decision.
You raised another point, which is if those lots up there are too small, maybe there's not room for IAs on all of them.
Well, I would think any responsible analysis of it would have to be,
Look at it both ways.
also look at sewers on this side. I mean, how much, in fact, the thing I was going to say later on, I'll bring it up now, is at Falmouth Inner Harbor, sewers were sort of glibly written off, but the sewer's right there.
Right there.
Just extending it, I mean, you got to calculate what the cost of that is and compare it before you say you don't do it.
Yeah, no, we definitely would do
Yes.
that in every case.
Yeah.
Well, I'd suggest here that we end up with a blended or a weighted hybrid thing that emphasizes both closeness to the water and distance upstream.
Just how far? and
Yeah, I
the
mean,
more
somewhere we
upstream
can
you
come
are.
up,
Yes.
you know, you can't come up with absolute numbers and say this is exactly what's going to work, but we could, I think, demonstrate that the farther upstream you intercept it, the better off you are, and the closer to the shoreline you intercept it.
Absolutely.
So
I think
maybe
that's-
we could sit
Yep.
down and come up with some special mix
Mhm.
that reflects that.
When that time comes.
See, when you get a chance, could you go back to the one that has the red and the blue lots?
Sure.
pictures? And the upper end of Davisville, have to take a
Yes.
closer look at that.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well.
Oh,
Oops, there we go.
There you go.
Okay,
You
so
can see it.
they're 15, they're the yellow.
Actually, the ones north of the yellow aren't dense at all.
Right, right, it's sort of like that pocket.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And you also have to think about on all these, it didn't come up in the case of Little Pond, I don't think, but there's going to have to be a formal rule, isn't there, or a law regarding what any future construction has to do. I mean, there are big areas of undeveloped lots. We have to specify what do people do if they want to build on one of those lots.
That is a major concern, which is now just bubbled to the surface in Falmouth, in Little Pond. There is one area off Worcester Court that had 7 lots under one ownership, and they are proposing
Oh, I
to...
know where that is. It just sold.
Yeah, they're proposing to combine those, dissolve the lot lines, and build something totally different than what the town had planned. So you couldn't be more right
And we did
about that
actually write,
concern.
we do have a regulation, the flow neutral bylaw.
Yeah,
And the whole point of the flow neutral bylaw, and it's a state requirement that we enacted this flow neutral bylaw at town meeting, was to control the flow at each lot where the sewer goes, because this is sewering for environmental remediation. And so the idea was don't promote development
But,
by sewers.
but yet politically on Little Pond, we let people put on extra bedrooms, right? Once the
No,
sewer
but
went in.
Up to 4.
up to 4,
Four.
but that was part of the calculation. That was part of the
That's
initial,
flow neutral?
that, the way, yes.
We're not revisiting that.
Okay.
We went to
No,
town
no,
meeting
I-
and put it
yeah,
exactly where they-
Okay.
It answered the state's requirements.
Hi, Doug Brown. So wouldn't the new development simply pay the same betterment as everyone else does, and it goes into the general fund?
Problem is, the answer to your question is yes. There's no problem with the money part. They figured that out. The problem is that there's going to be greater flow from a piece of real estate. It was projected, the plant was designed, the site for discharge, Site 7, the permit from the state is all predicated on a certain flow out of Little Pond Sewer Service Area. And now this developer's come in and said, sorry, I'm gonna do something different with these 7 lots, and we're gonna have 3 times the density that we originally started with.
But this is only because it's a 40B.
Right.
And his reading and many others' reading of the law is that 40B trumps local bylaws.
Right.
Therefore, if you're building a 40B, these requirements that the town put into place don't apply to you.
But it would seem then if our planning with the state is already in place, maybe he's not eligible to develop in that area.
Right. I think the town has to assert that. I think this is a matter of principle. This is the first time that the town is being tested on this matter of the flow neutral bylaw, so there's bound to be some issues.
It's a Board of Appeals question, and they're going to
Yeah.
have it.
5:30.
5:30.
They're going to have it tonight.
Tonight.
See,
I apologize for getting us off into Little Pond. I just meant that as an aside. But I mean for all these substantial
Yeah.
undeveloped areas on these
Yes.
other watersheds.
Yes?
well, these are not undeveloped. If you see the lower watershed is that buildup, they just happen to be larger lots.
Right.
Are they zoned for larger lots?
They're built on.
But you could tear one down and put in smaller ones,
If-
right?
if-
Subdivide,
Here.
unless it's zoned?
Sia, put up the slide that shows where the water sources are, the MVP.
Oh, yeah.
This thing. This will show you development, but there are still lots that are undeveloped. And it's something that in the past we have not paid attention to, but we're going to have to. So if you look at the one on the left, everywhere there is a water account, there is a dot. And where there are lots of water accounts, there's large brown areas. So that gives you an idea of development. But you can see that there's still white spaces, and those white spaces, there is no house. So your statement is correct. There are areas where there is no development. And theoretically, a 40B person could come in and rewrite it the way he wants it.
You know, I'm just saying in the math of it and the planning, whether you did IAs or sewers, we should keep in the backs of our minds, okay, how are you going to handle these undeveloped lots as they get built?
Correct.
Do we,
Yes, that's right. Yep,
Absolutely.
it's complicated.
it is complicated.
Any further input on the Green Pond watershed? Matt, thank you for joining us. I suspect you were the one who didn't notice it was 8
I
o'clock.
had a sinking feeling on the way here that something was not right.
Someone was going to do it. All right, next item here, discuss the invitation to join the Board of Selectmen at their joint meeting with boards and committees on Saturday, January 27th.
Pass that down to Matt.
Actually, the last time this committee met, it was with the Board of Selectmen at their meeting on the 18th of December. So we're invited to come back again, along with others. They have an agenda which has 3 things on it. The middle one is related to us, which is regarding new or replacement septic systems. And Virginia has she's not going to be able to be at the meeting, but she's been doing all the work on this topic. So.
Yes, exactly. So this is the beginning of a conversation amongst boards that are all, that have some common interests and that would, everyone would be better served if there was coordination. I heard about the meeting coming up and then asked if they would include this matter of watersheds. And so if you look at the agenda, A is overview of impaired watersheds in Falmouth, and Sia and I are working on a very short presentation. I think you all remember we've seen this. There are 15 impaired watersheds in the town of Falmouth. But it turns out that for the coastal pond overlay districts, which have the regulations that give a level of review if you're adding bedrooms, such as with the accessory apartments. It turns out that there are 4 ponds that are missing. That there are 15 impaired, but there are only 11 mapped. And so missing are Fiddler's Cove, Rand's Canal, Quistit Harbor, and Falmouth Harbor. And so development in those areas goes by a different set of rules. And I think just to begin with, that all of the impaired estuaries should have the same level of review. If you are a developer or putting in an accessory apartment in a coastal pond overlay district, you then have a review before the Board of Appeals. But the different sections of the bylaw apply depending on whether you're in a mapped district or not. And so there's now a case before the Zoning Board of Appeals, which happens to be in Quistit, and that's how this information sort of surfaced, that we have 2 different, it's not uniform. So what we're preparing, C and I are preparing, is to give all of these boards, since they're all together, an overview of the presentation that we made to the selectmen, so that they know about the 15 areas, they know how much nitrogen out of each one, they know which areas will need to be sewered or have some sewering, and which areas, if we are smart, we'll be able to handle with IAs and shelters and so on. So that's the introduction. And then we've asked, that the boards discuss what their experience is so far in dealing with the accessory apartment bylaw. That's the gist of that agenda.
On the first one, it's fair to note that the missing ones are Fiddler's Cove, Rand's Canal, Quistit Harbor, and Falmouth Harbor. We didn't have SMS reports on 3 out of 4 of those until very recently.
Unfairly, and that might be...
And which may be the reason why the town hadn't mapped them and voted them, all those things.
Could be. And this can be corrected at fall town meeting.
Yeah, the planning board is represented here and listening carefully. But these to be the last 4 that need to be mapped on the town's bylaw book.
Right.
Because that bylaw, we bent over backwards to make sure that the Board of Health would have the say on the wastewater issue. That was very clear in the bylaw. We want to make sure it was their decision. We weren't making a decision for them. It was up to them to review it.
Right.
And I think that's important.
Okay?
Question?
Yeah.
This meeting is going to start at 8:30?
Yeah.
When does it end?
10:30.
The first item on it is not ours, so you wouldn't have to be there at 8:30 unless you wanted to discuss coordinating side-by-side visions of the annual strategic plan and Falmouth local comprehensive plan.
What time do you think we might show up, 9?
9:30, something like that.
Yeah.
You might miss the bagels.
That's the point.
Got to get good seats.
You might
That
miss the
changes
bagels.
everything.
All right, we'll be there at 8.
Yes, maybe a line.
All right, so there's that. Everyone on the committee is invited. I get it. It's going to be quite a room full.
It's here.
No, across the
Public
street.
library.
Herman
The Herman
Room.
Room. Ah, good. Oh, yes, that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Report of members and staff.
We're going to have Steve go first on the report of members and staff because I've got his slide here. And then Tom's got a different thumb drive. The IT.
I don't know. I was sitting around in my briefcase, and I thought I'd bring it and see what's in there.
You may not want to show it on a public screen.
Yeah, I just arrived from Russia this morning.
Let's see, what we want to do is try to get this to fit.
Yes.
You.
Well, now they're burrowing down to the level of town elections. See, that's the next move. They've got the national ones taken care of.
We shouldn't worry.
How's that, Steve?
That's great.
All right.
Sia is wonderful as usual, and found this or generated it or cajoled someone into making it. I realized after our meeting on Falmouth Inner Harbor, I already said this earlier, but I just wanted to say it with the map, that there's a heck of a lot of sewers already in that area. And so that it would be crazy. It's very hard to see the key on this, but whatever that
It's
color is.
whatever in gray.
Whatever, if you call that gray,
Tan, yeah.
green, gray, tan, something, is sewer. So it would be, again, crazy not to have whoever's doing the phase one engineering on this, look at the cost of just extending that out enough to do the nitrogen, to compare the cost, just like we did for Oyster Pond. To the other, it's a small amount of nitrogen, and the sewer's right there. And we found in Oyster Pond where it was arguably less dense, and the sewer is arguably not as close, that the cost of the sewer and the IA is very close. So any place where it looks like it might go the other direction, you have to look at the sewer too.
Absolutely right. Especially here.
That's all.
Thank you.
Time for another question?
Absolutely.
See, there's.
Doug Brown,
Yeah,
chairman
right
of the,
bottom
chairman
of the
yet.
list.
Board of Selectmen.
Say water quality.
I'm the rookie.
Underneath that.
So,
Inside
is there
it says
any
perch
more
pond on it.
research being done to find out about the possibility of the outfall pipe so that we could maximize the existing plant and not have to build a new one?
Yes, I was gonna get to that.
Oh,
And there's sort of a list of things to do this year.
okay.
One of them is to identify discharge capability, discharge sites,
Mhm.
whether they be on land, on water, in this town, out of this town. There's half a dozen prospects out there, and I think we're gonna have detailed discussions about every one of them, with people coming here with detailed answers on every one of them, including cost and,
Okay,
feasibility. So yes, outfall is on that list.
great, thanks.
Which one?
Yeah, the one that says perch pond at the bottom, all of this. So a lot of this is sort of review, refresher, but Sia and Virginia and I have now had 2 meetings with several of the
I
engineers.
can do it from here. Keep going.
Do you have control there? Oh, you do, okay, so if we go to the next one, I'll explain our focus on perch pond. Color is not very good, but if you notice on the right-hand half, up there's that bright red spot that Eric was looking for. We call it Eric's red area. It's very dramatic there. The upper end of perch pond, and if we go and look on the left-hand side now, 2 things going on. One is very limited opening to the rest of Great Pond. You see there's a very narrow gap. And on top of that, there's very limited tidal amplitude there too. So there's very little flushing that goes on up there. And see if you could go to the next slide. Again, this is sort of refresher sort of stuff. That T-ticket path on the right-hand side, looking back towards Route 28, is just barely in the distance there. If a car was going by, you'd see it. And the left-hand side shows the layout. 28 there basically is downhill from both margins, draining towards that. Complicating thing is that's state DOT and not Falmouth. And some of that makes it to a T-ticket path, and you can see once it makes it there, it's a straight shot down the hill to, I'm standing at what's practically the low point.
Could you use a pointer?
Would you like the pointer?
Why don't I stand up there? The microphone's right
Could-
there.
Oh, he's gonna stand up there.
Yeah.
I'm getting lazy all of a sudden.
If you stand
Once you
it,
grab this mic here, which I assume, is that on?
yes.
Great,
Um,
much better.
Anyway, basically from here, up there, up here, all drains down, and ironically, close to the low point is right along in here. So one of the things we're missing when we're looking at stormwater is quantification. We don't know, and it's episodic, and you get a big heavy thunderstorm and a big flush of water comes through, and then for 90% of the time, there's very little going on. So we're sort of exploring right now. I should tell you that the timing for this and the sort of rush that we've been meeting with Falmouth DPW, this reconstruction and new storm drains is coming before Concom probably in less than a month. I'm guessing, Virginia, is that right, mid-February is
Yeah.
when
that's
it
Yes,
thought?
the hearing.
Yeah,
Yes.
the hearing with Concom and construction's expected this year.
Spring.
Yes, very soon. So we were trying to look, and this is mostly SIA's research and digging. I think if we go to the next slide, we can see what I just suddenly realized today. We now have IA storm drains in addition to IA septic systems. I'm now dubbing these, as of today, IA storm drains. This is one that was developed at the University of New Hampshire, and it's called a media box filter. And this is sort of the sump or trap. Water would flow into here, and solids and stuff would settle out there, and then dissolved materials would go on. And our assumption is that you could daisy chain these and for a larger area have a string of them. The key thing here is, if I could look at the very last slide, Sia, it's just a blow up of that other detail. This is where the media is actually, and you can see it's a buildup of different media. I apologize, in the original drawing the actual detail here is, but there's a foot of stone in here, of large stone, and then pea stone, a 3-inch layer on top, and then a foot of BSM, and we haven't yet found out. I've done a big search. Sia's looked a little bit and talked to a couple people. We don't know what this material is.
M stands
It's
for
a special
media.
sauce.
For media.
M stands for media.
Yes, it's well. I actually spent the morning Googling water filter media, thinking somewhere along the line I'd find an acronym that matches, and I didn't. But Sia has been in touch with the people in New Hampshire that are working on them. We'll find out. But anyway, the idea here, as opposed to typical catch basins where you mostly take out solids and don't worry too much about the dissolved material, the idea is here, this type of system would remove some nitrates. And what we don't know right now is performance numbers. To me, it says, I think the word we got was each box they thought would treat a 1/4 acre of impervious.
Yes, did you see that?
So that's about 100-foot square.
Yep.
That's not very big. And my concern is the box is only 4 feet long and 3 feet wide, and they're only showing 6 inches of water ponding on top of it. So it's a very low capacity system, so I don't have any idea what the throughput is, but this was...
You could trick them. You tell them that you want really fast throughput. Are they sure that it will drain quickly? And they'll
won't.
say, oh, yes.
No.
And then they're nailed because you need 24 hours residence time to get rid of the nitrogen.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's whatever action I think really has to happen in here, and if it goes slowly enough to get good remediation, it's not going to be a large volume over time. But anyway, now if we could back up 2 slides, I think, Sia.
I can tell you what BSM is if you would like to know.
Oh, you found it?
Yes. It is, consists historically of 4 materials: coarse sand, commercial loam, shredded wood chips, and food and yard waste compost.
Nice.
So carbon.
Homebrew.
It's
Yeah.
carbon
Homebrew.
source.
Okay.
Probably wood chips.
So where did you find that? You did a much better job than I did.
Yeah, yeah.
What's it stand for?
I haven't-
Biological,
I haven't
don't
yet
know what,
found that
soil
yet.
mixture media.
Oh. Oh, okay. So the other thing that we've thought about here is there's this big wooded lot here, and we found out meeting on Tuesday, they're not absolutely sure, but it looks like the town may have some easements, drainage easements into this lot, which if we could intercept some of the water that's going into the groundwater right now, but of course, again, this would be up to the state to figure this out, and we could disrupt it there. We might be able to get some remediation there, because that's a pretty good sized chunk of vegetated area. The other option would be this undeveloped strip here, which is where the big catch basins are right now that take the brunt of the drainage they're able to capture on T-Ticket Path right now, and perhaps put in some sort of living filter, vegetated drainage area, catch basin sort of thing there. But I think we need, right, Virginia, we need a bigger chunk of land there
Yeah.
for it to be consequential.
They thought so, but this was really just sort of back of the
Right, we were
conceptual.
right.
And I think that they're interested, they being the DPW, or at least willing to listen, about putting these treatment catch basins in upstream, which removes some, which means that a smaller basin downstream would help, and you'd have a series of filters in effect.
Yeah.
So they were thinking it as either or, and I'm not.
Right, I think it's gonna be incremental.
I think it's incremental.
We can add
Yeah,
on as we go
as it
along.
overflows.
But I also think the key from DPW's perspective is they want to be constructing an improvement in the spring.
Right.
And so the idea is we can explore some of these, what we're calling stormwater best management practices, improvements for nitrogen removal, but their permitting is going to go forward, and we can revisit and go back as we find out
Right.
how feasible, how effective, what capacity
Right.
these other technologies have. So they're sort of add-ons. And it works as an add-on. It's not like
Right,
them,
and
them
you-
doing their project works fine, and we could add these on later.
Right, from the permitting standpoint too, our general consensus was that we'd be improving the present situation, so Concom would likely give it a blessing. It wouldn't be like we were starting over from scratch and having to jump a lot of hurdles.
You can talk about it later, but isn't this part of a road paving project? Nobody's going to come back and tear up the road after they just paved it.
Well, you might, for, these boxes aren't very big, and that's what, and it may be that we could put a box in the undisturbed right-of-way along here.
Okay.
I forget how wide the right-of-way is there, but the town maps we were looking at on Tuesday, there was some space along here, and this is a crazy little pork chop lot. This is actually the motel property. See the motel here? They own this little strip. On this, it's about 3 inches wide, all the way to the water. And I can't imagine it's worth anything to them, so it may be room. Right now, there's just a overgrown ditch. I couldn't get to it when I did my survey last month. It's just so grown up in there, but there's a ditch that comes in right about here that comes out of the existing catch basin there. So, anyway, that's
Okay.
quick report. It's a work in progress, and we're just talking to people and trading ideas and trying to figure out what may be doable. And if I remember correctly, Scott's waiting to hear back from the state more on what might be possible up here.
Steve?
Are you saying that this is, that 98% of this is hidden in a road budget that's going to be spent anyway? Or if not, has anyone done a back-of-the-envelope calculation of the capital cost per kilogram removed per year?
No, I can tell you they haven't been done because right now, nobody's given us any performance data, so there's no way we can figure out what 1 box or 3 boxes or 10 boxes would remove. They're pretty cheap, the boxes are, and it's not complicated. It's cast concrete, certain dimensions, and it's got baffles in it, on weep holes and stuff. But no, I can't, and the answer to your question is no, we can't say, and we don't even know what the maintenance schedule was. You might have to open these up, and I don't know. We don't know. You're gonna have to pull this stuff out and recharge it, add to the carbon. I don't know.
Good point.
The DPW raised the maintenance issue. I think this is sort of, at this point, information exchange. They had planned a road project with Chapter 90 dollars that expire in June.
Yeah.
And you have a road T-Ticket Path, which now floods at every high tide. You have a drainage system that is not working and it is inadequate. And so they are planning to repair the road, increase drainage structures, And that was sort of like a train already in progress
Yes.
at the time that we initiated this conversation. We didn't know and they didn't know. And their aim wasn't in any way nutrient removal. That just wasn't part of their checklist. But we're talking about what can be retrofitted or incorporated. They're very concerned about the expiration of these Chapter 90 funds, and so they want to get the road construction permitted now so they can get that nailed down. And it sounded like whatever nutrient removal probably could be added on afterwards. And in terms of these particular boxes that he's talking about, they're outside of the jurisdiction of
Right.
the Conservation Commission
Right.
anyway,
Right.
because they're too far away from the wetlands. So that is a design change which could be done. As long
No,
as-
I'm just asking about
Yeah.
cost. I don't care about the Concom.
Okay.
I know you'll have to subsidize.
All right, and in terms of cost, we're still in the initial stages of conversation, and we still don't know enough about this BSM.
We don't know about the nitrogen.
So you-
We don't know about the nitrogen,
what-
the volume, how fast they process it.
So what you're saying is this would be a demonstration test?
Eh.
You would have to do some performance
Yeah.
evaluation?
Yes.
In addition to just...
Right.
Which
And
is-
the company haven't provided us with any performance yet.
Well, they're not a company, it's the University of New
Okay.
Hampshire and the town of Dover.
So,
And the town of Dover actually installed these along a river system for environmental purposes. Because the guy who was the head of the DPW facilities there wanted something that was simple and easy and doable. And that's where the design, that the system is actually named after him. It's a Boulanginator, because his name is Boulanger. Right, and so the University of New Hampshire is testing it, and so the idea was, we're on parallel paths. The DPW was doing this project because there's a problem in the road. We care about nitrogen, so is there a way to bring in, and it's basically a gravel wetland, so there's a book of stormwater best management practices, BMPs, and this is a standard one. It's not like Dover invented some new way of stormwater BMP for nitrogen removal. We're just trying to find out how this one, because it's got some unique features, actually works. And if we can come in as this process is going in the spring, and instead of them putting the regular catch basins in, they put in these gravel wetland catch basins, because that's really what they are. They're just glorified catch basins, which is why people like them, because they're simple. We would then be able to maybe get some nitrogen credit. And then the other piece of it is the really low area that now just goes right into Perch Pond is a much more complicated permitting project because it's in a wetland. And so for now, DPW is not going to change the existing storm drain. It is going to go where it goes.
where it goes, right.
And they're not going to, because if you alter more than 5,000 square feet of wetland, DEP and the state level permitting gets involved. So they're not doing that. They're just saying it's an existing condition. We're improving it to try to keep the flooding from happening. And then we can come in as additions, not part of the original design, but as a modular add-on to see if we can get nitrogen removal. That's what we learned at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Steve,
Isn't this, and that's all clear, I have no problem with it. Isn't this related to a talk that some reasonably local engineering firm, the name of which I can't remember, gave to us, and I don't remember the name of the concept, but
Worsley Whitten?
yes, Horsley Whitman,
5 years
parking
ago.
lots and so on,
Yes.
and collecting it,
Yeah.
and
Rain gardens.
rain gardens, there it is.
These are not rain gardens.
But it's related.
Rain gardens have vegetation.
These are all
Anyway.
devices to
Right.
Yeah.
intercept
Yeah.
ground, the water before it gets.
The rain
into
garden's a big difference because
Right.
it's got the vegetation, and
It's
these do
something
not.
swale,
Vegetated
And
swale.
Bioswale.
vegetated
It's
swale,
bioswale.
or a bioswale. There you
The
go.
answer is yes, and the committee kind of put it at the bottom of, at the lower end of the list of things to do because of the point you raised, which is it's just about impossible to figure out how much nitrogen you're removing at what cost.
Right.
So, if I could, I would just say, some of the old storm drains have outfall pipes that go directly into the ponds, so.
And this is one of them.
Okay, so it is.
Yeah,
So
this ditch that
I
I
would
talked
say
about,
at least if that would be removed and put in one of these new filter things, even if you can't test the nitrogen, just to have a ground discharge rather than an outfall, it's got to be an improvement,
Right.
you know, just for practical.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be our sense. This particular project, they had already made a decision not to get involved with the actual pipe, but to solve the road problem because it flooded at each high tide. So I'm just telling you, that's where the status of thinking was at the DPW. I think we've opened a door, and so still room to work.
So I guess if they don't do it now, then they can always plug the pipe later? Or-
That was our sense.
Seems like it'd be a potential problem for the road later. See?
I keep hearing about two different kinds of flooding here, one from, thunderstorms and then flooding from high tide.
Right.
High tides.
We want to make sure that this new drain technology is not draining water from high tide, right? You do not want salt water going through. these
No,
carbon-
no,
Would
you-
kill us
you
No,
pretty
no,
quickly.
no, they're upstream.
You wouldn't.
Okay.
It's farther
Higher-
downstream.
Higher ground.
In fact, if you have a problem with high tide flooding periodically, this isn't going to do anything about that.
That's right,
But they're talking about raising up the road.
yes.
Oh, raising the road would be.
Yeah, they're going to raise the road, I forget how much, but that's
A
part of the
foot.
plan, the
A
road
foot.
bed is
Yep.
gonna be raised.
All right, great report. Thank you very much for
Sure.
opening the door on this. Any other reports of members and staff?
I just am reporting for the permeable reactive barriers that the grant application that we filed last June with the state did not get approved. And the working group is going to meet after this meeting and talk about what we do next.
Yeah, in the letter rejecting us here, they apparently decided that the only thing they wanted to give money for this year was road runoff projects.
Stormwater,
Stormwater projects,
which was not in the RFP.
which was not in the RFP, so we are flummoxed.
Flummoxed, yes.
Well, when you make the rules, you can change them later.
Apparently, that's the rule. That's the rule, all right. I have a sort of a scheduling issue. Andrew Gottlieb, who's a selectman in Mashpee and also head of the Association for the Protection of Cape Cod, they've been working very closely with the Barnstable and with Sandwich to allocate the load that each town is contributing to, not 3 bays, but to
Papaneset.
Papaneset.
and they have succeeded in reaching an agreement between those 3 towns as to who's responsible for what percent of the load. Matt Patrick called last week and said, isn't the town Falmouth and Mashpee and Sandwich had that same conversation? And the answer is yes. Andrew is going to come here on the 15th on behalf of Mashpee and also on behalf of APCC to describe the process they went through in getting to the goal they got to, which was every town taking responsibility for a certain amount of nitrogen. And I suspect it's going to be high on our agenda to do the same.
So that will be our regular meeting?
Regular meeting on the 15th.
At 3:30?
Yeah.
Got that, Matt?
3:30?
3:30.
Okay.
Yeah, the only reason we started early this
I'll
time
be here
is
at 3.
because we were helping to accommodate the zoning board of appeals that wanted to start at 5.
The other future appearance is, we don't have a commitment yet, but Ray Jack has been the Falmouth delegate to the 4 Upper Cape towns that have been meeting to talk about the military reservation, the septic treatment plant, and the discharge site up there. The military has no need for that amount of infrastructure and doesn't want to continue to pay for it, so they're reaching out to the area towns to see how it could be useful to the area towns. Ray's been representing Falmouth, and Falmouth's interest is not so much in the treatment plant, but in the discharge site. And Red Pierce, who works with us already on Steve's project, they're the consultant working up there on that project. So he's trying to schedule Red Pierce to come down here and meet with the committee to lay out what they've been doing, what use, what they have up there might be to the town of Falmouth in terms of discharge site. And when we have a commitment from my peers, we'll have a date and they'll be here. That also goes for some of these other discharge options that are on the list. We're going to have major presentations on each one as they're ready and willing to do so. Because as we all know, we're not going to add any sewering anywhere unless the discharge issue is resolved.
Well, it all has to do with the cost. I mean, we know discharge works, especially
Sure.
Otis already has it. It's a question of what it costs to get it there from various places.
Right. Any other reported members and staff? Any comment from the press, the league, the selectmen, the planning board?
See you Saturday.
All right.
See you Saturday.
We have to vote the minutes of the prior meeting, which was December 7th.
It's a week from Saturday, right?
2
Yeah,
weeks from Saturday.
it's a week from Saturday.
Everybody got a copy of the minutes? Email? Anybody have any additions or corrections?
Yeah, the first bullet under part 2, where it says this watershed, it'd be this water body, right? It's different.
I don't know, I have to look at it.
I'm looking at it. It had to do with Salt Pond
It has to do with
watershed.
the configuration of Salt Pond, so.
Right, you're right.
needs
This
to be-
water body is
Yeah.
different. It's a
Yeah.
kettle hole pond, not a
Yeah.
drowned valley.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Water body, yep, thanks.
Okay, any other additions or corrections? All right then, motion to...
I'll move they be accepted as altered or
Second.
amended.
Moved and seconded to accept the minutes as amended. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Abstain.
Abstained? Good. That was late, but it's in time for his motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
So Eric, the pop